Welcome back to the Business of Biotech. I'm Matt Pillar, and on the heels of a U.S. election that promises to have a significant impact on the biotech and biopharma industries, I'm geared up for a conversation on what might come to pass after Inauguration Day with none other than the Renaissance man of biotech himself, our dear friend, Allan Shaw. Allan, welcome back. It's great to see you.
Thanks a lot, Matt. Always great to be here. Great to see you, and I always enjoy the collaboration.
Sure. Yeah, me too. And this promises to be an interesting conversation because this is a situation that is unfolding in real time as we speak, and everybody's talking about it. And who better to chat with about what might be coming down the pike than you? These impacts that we could be looking at on the heels of the 2024 elections, they're going to have at least seemingly, right? There's the writings on the wall that there's a lot of change coming in life sciences industries and in the general public health space as well. So I want to start broadly with the impact, potential impacts that is on public health. If you look at the last Trump administration, it's clear that they were frequently at odds with NIH during COVID. There's a general consensus in the incoming administration that the NIH contributed to an erosion in public trust during that time. The NIH is a bulwark in the research community, and a lot of money gets funneled through it. So any volatility there, much less potential funding cuts, are understandably met with concern. And I'm seeing a lot of that concern online in conversations with folks in the biotech space. So let's start with that. Let's start with the NIH. What's your observation? What's going on there again in the context of what might come after Inauguration Day?
No, it's a good point. And, it's certainly an emotional period of time. And in the absence of good information, there's certainly a plethora of speculation out there. And I think sometimes people get lost in the weeds. And I think, certainly it's important to focus on the big picture. And while it may be fun to speculate, it may not be so fun when we're living the reality.
Yeah.
But to your question, the NIH plays a critical role in driving innovation, particularly in funding early stage research that private industry typically avoids. It's a gap that they fill. And any instability in its leadership, policy, or funding could disrupt this vital innovation pipeline, especially in areas like vaccine development, cancer research, and infectious diseases. In the challenging funding environment, cuts or policy shifts would be detrimental to the progress we've made. With that said, the perception that the NIH's public trust has eroded during COVID complicates these efforts while rebuilding the confidence in the institution. With RFK Jr.'s pending appointment, there's both potential for positive change. His calls for transparency and accountability could help restore public trust. And risk, given his controversial stance in vaccines and public health, his leadership may introduce a little bit of volatility or redirect priorities, adding uncertainty to already fragile landscape. But I think it's hard to dispute that the NIH's role is indispensable, and bipartisan support will be key to ensuring its focus remains on science-driven, nonpartisan health advancements. In the end, maintaining stability at the NIH is essential for safeguarding long-term innovation and public confidence in healthcare.
Yeah, it's interesting. You talk about that erosion of trust. There's we saw it in the election. And I'm painting with a very broad brush right now. But there's a split, right? There's a giant population of consumers and people and American citizens who distrust perhaps the science and or the scientific advice, the health advice that's coming out of federal agencies. And then, on the other hand, you've got this giant swath of people who distrust the appointment of nominees who distrust science, right? Like, how do you talk about bipartisanship? I don't know. I don't know how you reconcile how you bring these two camps together. And now that these camps are, at least seemingly, these are nominations, right? Like we can acknowledge that these are nominations. RFK Jr. He's been nominated, he hasn't been confirmed. You look at Vivek Ramaswamy, right? Like he's been nominated, or he and Elon Musk have been appointed to create a new entity that's designed to slash government inefficiency. Vivek Ramaswamy has a lot of opinions on FDA inefficiency, right? These things haven't necessarily taken effect yet, but I'm just curious about your take on the likelihood that bipartisanship in a Congress that's controlled by Republicans under a Republican president is even an ideal, an ideal that we should take seriously.
It's certainly, you touch on the vicious virtual cycle that feeds on this, and you get nowhere. I would, I think in some respects, we've grown accustomed to stagnation in Washington because of the gridlock that we've seen because the idea of bipartisanship has taken a vacation.
Yeah.
But I would say that, with the recent changing of the guard, there seems to be more of an ability that you can get things done without the gridlock if people can figure out a way to row in the same direction.
Yeah.
Just because you're in the same political party, it certainly appears to be that it's while you're wearing the same jersey, you're running different plays. You could be on the field running a pass play while the other guy's doing a running play. It's not going to work.
Yeah.
So,
If you're like, let's just assume for a minute, let's just, put your mind in a role where you're, leading an early stage research company that perhaps historically would be the beneficiary of NIH funding to conduct its research. Are you concerned right now? Like, are you worried about potential slashes to that funding? And if so, what do you do? Like, what's your playbook?
yeah, it's hard to worry about something that hasn't happened yet.
Mm,
I mean, I think you do always want to try to avoid being single-threaded in any sort of financing strategy that you have. So yeah, so I do think it's beholden on leadership of organizations to try to find as many different pockets of funding resources. I think it's always fundamental about expanding the investor base. I think you're never done expanding an investor base. So this is it. This is and may be a challenge. Right now, it's all speculation. I think the bar is going to, the metrics and what is being used to allocate resources are going to be reevaluated, and it's unclear what those priorities are going to be.
mm-hmm.
So I think good science at the end of the day trumps all, no pun intended. But so I think with good science you'll find it. But I do think there's an general issue that in terms of funding innovation, if you don't have necessarily the right pedigree of folks behind you from the beginning, as you form your capital formation, it becomes harder to attract that so-called smart money, fundamental money later on. So, and in programs that are unsexy, such as infectious diseases, the whole issue about antibiotics is a crisis waiting to happen at the end of the day. That's not getting attention. So, the NIH is going to have to play, as I said, step in where private industry is unwilling to step in. So
Yeah.
it's an important role here, and as a friend of mine says, the pendulum never stops in the middle. So, I think the question is making sure it's properly calibrated, not who's to say that the level of funding today is the right amount. What's our
Yeah.
return on it? What's been the success on that? What's the accountability on that? So the points raised by the critics, they're fair points. It's about right sizing things. And I think what we as a government or as a process is we kind of just take whatever's been approved in the past and now view that as an entitlement. And then we just layer on more things. I think it's always good to practice a zero-based budgeting approach as opposed to just assuming that, what was done last year was the right thing and we're just going to build on it.
Yeah. I just brought Vivek Ramaswamy up out of left field. I want to remind my listeners and ask you, Allan, did you know that Vivek Ramaswamy was my guest on episode 6 of the Business of Biotech podcast, episode 6 in the summer of 2020.
Wow.
Back when he was still leading Roy Vant.
No, that's an interesting trivia question. You should have gotten him to sign the podcast or something.
I should have some. You might just imply that I gave him the platform.
I mean, he's the first presidential candidate that I was connected to on LinkedIn.
Yeah, same. Yeah, first presidential candidate I've ever interviewed. I can say that for a fact. Let's talk about the CDC. The new administration is hinting that it would like to split the CDC into two distinct divisions. One focused on health surveillance around infectious disease, and the other independently focused on public health recommendations. And it's made clear that it wants to draw a stark line between these two departments. What do you see playing out there? If that were to come to pass, what implications should we be looking out for?
Splitting the CDC into two divisions, one for health surveillance and the other for public health recommendations, could address criticisms of its dual mandate and help streamline operations. By focusing each division on its core function, the CDC could become more agile, with surveillance arms dedicated to tracking outbreaks and trends, and the recommendation arm focused on public guidance and policy. The upside could be a more transparent and accountable CDC, potentially restoring public trust. However, this split could create challenges. Close collaboration between the two divisions will be crucial to ensure swift, coordinated responses during health crises such as COVID. Without it, there's a risk of mixed messages or slower reactions, undermining the CDC's credibility, which they actually did during COVID, nonetheless. Yeah. If executed well, this restructuring could strengthen the CDC, but it will require clear communication and strong leadership to ensure the agency's mission stays unified, protecting public health. Therefore, it might be easier said than done. But conceptually, I do see the merits of it.
Yeah.
And maybe I can say I understand the merits of it.
Right. Yeah, I think the public and industry. I think the public and industry concern would probably, I'm just speculating here, but would probably lie more on the public health recommendations side of that reorg. Do you see any potential negative implications for industry around a split like that, or is it too early to say?
I think it's a little too early to say. I think you want the group to be functioning well. I think misinformation, poor coordination. We've seen what happens when that occurs, and slow responses, you leave it for people to making up their own rules as they go. And since it's the sandbox we all play in, I think it's important for it to be functioning well, and there's obviously collateral impact. But as it could impact industry directly at this point, I think there's too many variables.
Yeah. So just for the benefit of our audience, we're recording this on November 15th. This episode is probably going to drop like towards the end of the month. And this situation is so fluid that when I prepared some questions for Allan, I was speculating on the potential nomination of an RFK Jr. to one of these agencies. And in the time since I drafted some questions for Allan, which was like a day and a half ago, RFK has indeed been nominated. for the position to head the HHS. So 2 days ago, I didn't really take that potential, that speculation that was going on in the media, that, could RFK potentially become the head of the HHS? I didn't really take that seriously. Well, then I saw that Trump nominated Matt Gaetz to be the attorney general, and I was like, well, anything could happen. And indeed, he has nominated RFK Jr. To head the HHS. So I'm interested in your perspective on that. He's had some very, and maybe a lot of this might just be media bluster. They fool us all the time, but he's had some pretty lightning rod opinions around vaccines and fluoride in water. And I thought, well, maybe that influence, whether he's nominated or not, has already started to shape the Trump administration's take on what it's going to do with the HHS. Now that he's nominated, it's solidified, right? That his influence and his stance on some of these controversial topics is certainly influencing the administration. What do you think about this? Like, what do you think about the potential of his influence on the HHS, given, like I said, some of those controversial stances that he's made?
Now, RFK is certainly a polarizing individual, and his potential appointment to lead the HSS is a significant development. I think if you listen to folks, most people thought that the chances of that happening was highly, highly remote. So it just goes to show that literally everything is on the table.
Yeah.
And his appointment signals the administration's openness, in my view, to challenging traditional health policies. Status quo isn't going to work. I remember when I was younger, in my more formative years, as an auditor at one of the big four firms, I remember sitting my staff down at the beginning of each engagement, and I'd ask them, why did the auditor cross the road? And they'd look at me like I had five heads. And I said, because they did it last year, like night closed day. So, I think, challenging things is an important part of evolution. There's always potentially a better way of doing things. So while RFK's Senate confirmation is uncertain, his views on vaccines and fluoride have already begun to shape public health conversations. His possessions resonate with segments of the public calling for more cautious alternative health approaches, which could push for greater transparency and debate on vaccine policy and environmental health. Even if he doesn't land the role, his influence is already sparking a broader discussion around vaccine acceptance, environmental chemicals, public health, and discussions around food. His presence has undoubtedly expanded the discourse, and his views will likely continue to influence the administration's public approach on health, for better or for worse.
Do you think again, painting with a broad brush and painting in only black and white, there's the perception that's out there that, hey, bottom line, RFK Jr. bad for pharma. What do you see as the potential upshot? I mean, there's no question that there's plenty of room for improvement and change in the space in terms of health outcomes. And I don't want to go too deep in the weeds here, but what do you think his influence might lead to around the discourse that could be upshot for industry, for the pharmaceutical industry that right now is probably looking at this like, hey, if the people at the top are like downplaying the necessity or value of vaccines, again, with a broad brush, that's bad. That's bad for business, right? Like, what's the upshot?
If you're talking about, using vaccines as an example, he has dialed back a lot of his rhetoric recently about vaccines. He certainly said that he wasn't going to take things off the market. He was talking about better disclosure. That's a little unclear what that means. I think the data supports the vaccines that are on the market. So that needs to be bottomed out a little bit. But my perception is it's he may take a different stance, but certainly he has dialed it back. And maybe we'll see. But
Yeah.
he perceives
Yeah.
being softer on that particular issue.
Yeah, and it is important to take all these things in context. I mean, we just came off a campaign, and campaign rhetoric never. I think it's safe to say it never, parlays it never equates to reality post inauguration day. So we just need to remember that.
Indeed, but it would seem that, at least based on the first couple of weeks, that Trump is certainly posturing to deliver on all his campaign promises.
Yes. Yeah. 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 Um, I mentioned again. I'll mention Vivek because I want to talk a bit about the FDA, and he's been quite vocal about inefficiencies at the FDA, and he comes at that with with a unique set of perspectives. He led multiple biotechs. He grew a biotech into a very significant player on the biopharma landscape. So he's had firsthand experience with the FDA. And some of his suggestions around developing a more efficient FDA could be rather good for business, particularly for biotechs. He talks about excessive trials, phase 3 trials. He talks about our inability or unwillingness to take, other foreign agency observations and recommendations into account in our own approvals process, which seems counter to the globalization of healthcare. So some of the things that I hear him talking about, like I said, I mean, at face value, I think, well, these suggestions could actually be a boon for biopharma and biotech in particular. What do you think? What do you think about not just his influence, but the entire administration's potential influence on the FDA?
No, that's the big question is, how's this going to affect us? And I think the FDA is the most logical place to focus on the collateral consequences of the new administration, for better or for worse.
A carefully chosen consequences word. Yes.
With further definition.
Yeah.
But I think what Vivek has highlighted are correct, broadly speaking. I think the devil's in the detail. I think RFK's potential appointment to lead HSS could bring significant changes, particularly given his confrontational stance towards the agencies like the FDA.
Mm-hmm.
His rhetoric about purging civil servants and ending what he terms the FDA's war on public health raises concerns about workforce instability, especially when skilled expertise is crucial to addressing public health challenges, such as chronic health diseases. That's not to be taken lightly. I understand there's a lot of open positions at the FDA. And that might become more acute. Political pressure has always played a role at the FDA in one form or the other. But these potential purges could amplify instability, jeopardize its ability to make science-driven decisions. While RFK Jr. supporters might frame this as a push for transparency and accountability, the risk is that this could lead to overly politicalized decisions and reduce effectiveness at a time when the FDA is grappling with systemic inefficiencies. Beyond political concerns, it's clear the FDA's clinical development process for chronic disease is overdue for reform. Legacy practices such as requiring large cardiovascular outcome trials after pivotal efficacy studies drive up costs and prolong timelines, creating significant barriers to innovation. This is particularly problematic for common chronic diseases like heart disease and diabetes, which remain leading causes of mortality, yet attract fewer investment dollars due to the high costs and risks of development. This has recently changed through the renewed interest in cardiometabolics and, the weight loss drugs driving outcomes on diabetes. But I would say, the process that you have to run to get these drugs approved, the costs associated with it do impact the ability of bringing drugs to market. As noted by former FDA Deputy Commissioner The agency's highly empirical statistical approach often results in overly large trials that serve populations broadly, but fail to address the nuances of treating individual patients. A shift towards a more flexible and conditional framework is needed, one that emphasizes smaller, targeted studies with population subsets to hasten patient access to innovation therapies while de-risking the process. Leveraging real-world evidence and technologies like electronic health records could also improve efficiency and better reflect the actual patient experience. Ultimately, whether through political influence or systemic reform, the FDA must address these barriers to innovation. Reducing unnecessary regulatory burdens would not only improve patient access to therapies, but also encourage greater investment in tackling chronic diseases and areas that demand urgent attention.